Welcome to Star Circle, Season 3, Episode 5. Food for Thought. That was a book written in 1997 by doctors of psychology Saul and Joan Miller, husband and wife team. Later were divorced, and so the book is out of print. That's why I did a book report on it, because I thought it was really important information about how the right foods can help you reduce stress, increase strength, prevent disease, achieve sexual satisfaction, and feel centered in mind and body. The food we eat affects what we think, say, and do. The Millers had 100 years of documented research to back up their claims about the important relationship between nutrition and mental health. Basically, they suggest eating a centered, natural diet and avoid extreme, disintegrating, and alienating foods. So I am going to break that down into much greater detail for you. Centered foods are low meat, low sweet, low fat, low salt, sugar-free, and caffeine-free. Centered foods are whole grain, vegetables, fruits, legumes, nuts, and seeds. They suggest avoiding extremes. This again means low meat, low sweet, low fat, low salt, no coffee, and no alcohol. Extreme foods include chemically processed and chemical additives. Extremely expansive foods are stimulants, sugar, and alcohol. Extremely contracting foods are salt, meat, and eggs. Fat foods are eggs, cheese, butter, margarine, and fatty meats. They want you to remember the law of opposites. Expansion balances contraction. Again, I'm going to get into this, breaking it down into much greater detail, but it explains our cravings and addictive patterns. In other words, when we eat a bunch of salty chips, we're going to crave a box of cookies afterwards. Avoid overeating. I think that's one of the most important things you can do, and it's quite high on their list. Food equals energy equals behavior in this theory. So looking at major factors, the four major factors that influence behavior. One is our constitution. That's inherited. Two is conditioning. That's learned. Three is the external environment, confronting situation and demands. Now, the first three affect the fourth, which is our internal environment of electrochemical impulses. Nothing has greater control over our biochemistry than foods. The authors one a clinical psychologist, the other a social psychologist. They define foods on a continuum. On one end of the continuum is expansive foods, and they consider these to be plant derivatives. On the other end of their continuum, with plant foods in the middle, are animal foods. So we have plant derivatives on one extreme and animal foods on the other extreme. So let's look at that in a little bit more detail. Plant derivatives are expansive, larger, above ground, fast, soft, liquid, juicy, sweet, sour, vegetable, moderate, warm, less cooking, raw, outward, potassium, alkaline forming, expansive behavior. That includes coffee, tea, syrups, honey, concentrated fruit juices, drugs, alcohol, sugar. So animal foods are contracting. So that's the other end of their continuum. Opposite expansive is contraction. And contracting is smaller, below ground, slow, hard, solid, dry, salty, bitter, animal, extreme cold, desert, more cooking, inward, sodium, acid forming, and contractive behavior. Foods are salt, butter, meat, cheese, eggs, and fish. Again, in the middle of the continuum are your centered foods, and these are fruits and vegetables, grains, seeds, and legumes. So I want to explain more about the fat, protein, and carbohydrate balance in foods. Okay. Mother's milk, which is considered to be the most centered, the most balanced food that a human being can consume, is 8 to 10% protein, 26 to 29% fat, and 65% carbohydrate. Centered, balanced, and whole foods have a similar protein to carbohydrate ratio as human milk, that is 1 to 7. Extreme expansive foods have a 0.01 ratio of protein to carbohydrates, while extremely contractive foods have a 25 ratio of protein to carbohydrates. Again, whole grains are considered the most balanced of foods, most like mother's milk. Interesting to note, the Japanese word for peace and harmony is wa. It is composed of two characters symbolizing grain and mouth. Biologists have observed that all living things are motivated by a need for homeostasis, the continuous balancing of life systems.